Hey, this is Charles with Rocky Mountain ATV MC. Today I'm going to show you how to inspect your Nikasil coating on your cylinder to see if you can either reuse it or if it needs to be recoated or the whole cylinder needs to be replaced. Nikasil cylinders are found on most modern machines that are out there today. And what this is a nickel silicon carbide coating. And this just goes inside of the cylinder. It's really thin. The benefit of this coating over a cast iron liner is it's lightweight. It gives you better heat transfer. It has really good lubrication properties. And this coating is so hard, it's going to last a really long time as long as it's properly taken care of. That means staying up on your oil changes, making sure your air filter is clean and working properly. And some machines are going to give you a predetermined interval for piston replacement. So as long as you're staying up on those maintenance items, this coating should last a long time. Now, anytime you're rebuilding your top end, you want to inspect this Nikasil coating to see if you can either reuse the cylinder or if it needs to be repaired or replaced. Now, if you try to reuse a bad cylinder, it could not only wear out your new parts quicker, but your bike probably won't run right. And this could lead to some expensive repairs down the road. So for those reasons, we're going to show you the common checks to make to this Nikasil coating. So the first thing I want to talk about, I need to show you the difference between a cast iron liner and a Nikasil cylinder. So this cylinder right here has a cast iron liner. It has this different colored ring at the top. This is a sleeve that goes all the way through. And this one, it's going to be magnetized. So I can stick my magnet on there. The Nikasil coating, this is usually about 3/1000 of an inch thick. You can't really tell any difference between the metal surface. If I try to stick my magnet on there, this will not stick on there. So if the magnet doesn't stick and your cylinder looks like this, then you have a Nikasil coated cylinder. Once you've determined that you have a Nikasil coated cylinder, you need to do some preliminary cleaning before you can do some closer inspections. So for this one, this is out of our KTM 690 Enduro R. We're rebuilding it right now. So I'm going to remove the head gasket. I've got a base gasket on here. And I'm just going to take a little bit of contact cleaner and spray this off. You want to remove all the oil. And it doesn't have to be perfect right now. We just want to do some initial checks to make sure we're going to be able to reuse this cylinder before we go any further. Now, one more thing before we begin inspecting the cylinder, you want to pay attention to the reason that you actually are replacing your top end. So some people are just doing routine maintenance. Maybe the service manual tells you to replace the piston at a certain interval. Other people are going to have burning oil or blow-by. And then some people might even be experiencing a partial seizure, or you could have a complete engine failure. So those last two cases, odds are you're probably not going to be able to reuse the cylinder. But no matter what the reason is that you're in here, you want to thoroughly inspect this Nikasil coating to make sure that it can either be reused or can be repaired. Now, to get this cylinder inspected, we're going to do 5 visual inspections, and the last thing we're going to do is measure it. So the first thing we're going to do is check for any glazing. So to explain what glazing is, I just want to show you guys a brand new cylinder first to show you exactly what a cylinder should look like. So this one has cross-hatching roughly at a 45-degree angle, and there's no deep gouges or grooves, and none of the Nikasil on this is pitting, chipped, or flaking off. So this is exactly what you want. So this cylinder is a good example of glazing. Now you can see on here we have a polished, shiny surface, and you don't really see any cross hatches going through it. You do not want this on your cylinder. The cross hatching actually helps retain oil and lubricate the piston. So if you don't have that cross hatching in there, things aren't going to be lubricated as well, and you might have some accelerated wear. You're also going to have a loss of performance. Now this is the cylinder off our 690, and you can see we have some cross hatching that is still in there, and that's a good sign. And it's not really glazed. You can see a little bit of glazing down towards the bottom of the cylinder where that piston skirt rides. But other than that, this really looks pretty good. There's not really any scuffing or grooves or chipping of the Nikasil. Looks pretty good, but you will notice that this has a dull finish. So what can happen is a thin film of oil can actually bake on to this coating. So that's where things like honing, that can take that caked on film off. All right, our next cylinder, you can see it still has some cross hatching, but it's a little more glazed, a little more shiny throughout here. And then we also have a little bit of scuffing going on. But these scuffing marks, if I run my finger across there, my fingernail is not catching on anything. So we should be able to clean this cylinder up and reuse it. Same thing with the 690, we'll get that cleaned up. So we'll go ahead and move on and show you some cylinders that you will not want to reuse. The next thing that I want to point out that we want to pay attention to on these cylinders is scoring. So you can see this cylinder, we have a ton of grooves in here, and my finger, it lightly catches on some of these. It's not terrible, but you can see someone already tried to clean the cylinder up with a hone, and I imagine that before they honed it, this was probably much worse. And if you have this much damage on yours, chances are the rings are probably not going to seal very well, and I would definitely not be rerunning this cylinder. The next thing to inspect for is, in the case of a partial seizure, you might have some aluminum that actually rubbed off onto your Nikasil coating. So you can see that right by our exhaust port. We've got a little bit of aluminum buildup around here. If this happens to you, sometimes you can clean that up with some muriatic acid. And if you do that, just be aware it does eat through aluminum. So obviously it's going to take this off. But if you get it anywhere else on the cylinder, it's going to start eating through that as well. So be really careful if you decide to do that. Now, once you've cleaned that aluminum away, you can go ahead and continue with your regular inspections. This cylinder also had some good signs of scoring. So if I run my finger across this cylinder in a few different spots, it has quite a few places where it scored pretty deep. So the next thing we need to check for is any chips, pitting, or flakes coming off of the Nikasil coating. On 2 strokes, you want to check right by all of the ports because you have some thin areas. It's really easy for that to chip right there. So if you do find anything that's chipped off and you see bare aluminum underneath, you definitely need to get this cylinder recoated. So as we were looking for any chipping, this cylinder actually had quite a bit up by the top. So for that reason, we're not going to be reusing this cylinder. The last thing we're going to be talking about is severe engine damage. So you can see this piston, the piston skirts actually broke off. The wrist pin welded to the connecting rod, so we had to cut it off. And this piston actually went sideways inside the cylinder. So this is the cast iron liner, and even though we're talking about Nikasil cylinders, this is the only one we had that had a catastrophic failure. So on this, even though the piston went sideways, it didn't completely destroy this liner. I mean, there is some damage in here, but a lot of times on a Nikasil cylinder, if the piston goes sideways, it's going to punch through the cylinder wall into those water jackets, and you're going to see a lot worse damage. Now again, this is a good example of what a cylinder should not look like. So if your Nikasil looks like this, or if your piston did punch through the cylinder wall and go into the water jackets and create some serious damage, you can actually have that cylinder repaired and recoated. But at that point, it might be cheaper just to replace the cylinder. So from here, what we're going to do is continue with our 690 cylinder. We're going to clean that up and then take some measurements. Now we're going to get to the 6th and final check in a minute, but before we do that, on our cylinder, since it passed the visual inspection, we need to deglaze this. So what we're going to do is remove the carbon ring by using some Scotch-Brite, contact cleaner, and a rag. And when I use the Scotch-Brite, I'm just going in the same directions as the crosshatch pattern that's already in there. Now honing, again, all we're doing when we're talking about deglazing, we're removing that thin oil film away from the cylinder wall and restoring the crosshatch. So this is just going to be a really quick process. We're going to get in and get out quick. We've gone ahead and honed our cylinder. If you need to know how to do this, we do have a detailed video on that, so be sure to check it out. Now you can see that once we've deglazed this cylinder, it has a nice crosshatch pattern to it, and it doesn't have that really dull finish anymore. It's nice and clean. So at this point, what we can do is start taking measurements. Now this is probably the most important check you're gonna make, because measurement is king. If the measurements are out of spec, then you need to replate or replace this cylinder. Now to measure the cylinder, you're either gonna be using a dial bore gauge or a snap gauge. Either one will work fine. A dial bore gauge is a little bit easier to use, but what you're gonna do is take your measurements and compare them to the specs in the book. You're checking for a bore that is too large, you're checking for taper and out of round. So again, if anything is out of spec, you're going to want to replate or replace the cylinder. So how you're gonna check this is 90 degrees from the wrist pin. You're gonna go front and back where those piston skirts normally ride. You'll measure at the top, write that measurement down, middle and bottom, and then you'll turn the gauge 90 degrees, top, middle, and bottom, write all those measurements down, compare them to the specs, and determine where you need to go with the cylinder. If your cylinder passed all of these inspections, then you should be good to clean it up and reinstall it back onto the machine. But if it failed any of these inspections, then you either want to replace it or get it repaired. All the measurements on our cylinder checked out okay. So last thing I want to do is make sure that this bore is perfectly clean. And the best way to clean these out, again, is with a brush and some warm soapy water. That's going to get all the grit from honing, or even if you just use Scotch-Brite and clean that carbon ring up at the top. A good way to test for that is use a good clean rag like this that has some color to it. I'm going to apply some penetrating oil to this rag. I'm going to wipe the cylinder. And so you can see we didn't pick up any grime or debris at all. Now, if you did pick up any grime or debris when you wiped out the cylinder, you want to go back through, wash this thing out again in some warm soapy water. But if you didn't, like ours, what you want to do is put a light coating of oil on the inside of this cylinder. Now, Nikasil probably won't corrode like a cast iron cylinder would, but it's a good safety precaution. And that's all there is to inspecting your Nikasil cylinder to see if it can be reused or if it needs to be repaired or replaced. Now, if you do need a new cylinder, we do have options under the OEM diagram. We also have aftermarket options and even big bore kits, piston kits, that kind of thing. So check that out on our website. We offer free shipping on orders over $75. And if you haven't already, subscribe to the channel for more helpful content. Thanks for watching.